Do you think that it's really bad right now, especially bad right now, or has it always been this bad, do you think, that we just didn't notice it because we didn't have multiple cable news channels? Like, can you just give us some perspective on this?
Sure, thanks Annabelle. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me, and it's great to see all these people, as Darrell said, out on a Saturday morning. I, 2 weeks ago, went out to Prince William County to one of the first coffee party meetings, and it was really interesting to hear what people had to say about the system. I think people are angry. I think people feel ill-served by the system. I think a recent NBC Wall Street Journal poll, I was going to write my notes on my hand, but I had too many notes, so I brought them with me. 93% said that there is too much partisan fighting between Democrats and Republicans and very little cooperation. So I think across the board, whether you're a conservative or a liberal, a Democrat or a Republican, people feel there's too much partisan fighting and not enough is getting accomplished in Washington. I'm curious about who's in the room. We're in Adams Morgan, so for those people watching at home, this is a sort of, yes, it's a hip sort of area of Washington, so we may not have an exact cross-section here. How many people sort of think of themselves as Republicans out there? Well, there were no hands raised. Okay. How many people think of themselves as Democrats? How many people think of themselves as independents? So just about as many hands raised independents as Democrats in this room. And I think that's pretty typical across the country. Right now, about 40% of all Americans, according to polls, consider themselves independents, which is a larger group that consider themselves either Democrats or Republicans. So I think people do feel a bit ill-served by the two-party system and want more of a choice and want to express themselves in that way. That's the largest, well, it's been about that percentage for a while, but sort of the largest block in about 70 years. And I think these independent centrists, who are the voters that I'm particularly interested in, because I think they decide elections. They are, you know, everyone's heard about Ohio, everyone's heard about these swing states, Colorado, Virginia has become very much a swing state, New Hampshire. These states decide the presidential election, and specifically these voters in the middle in those swing states decide who's going to be elected to the presidency or to Congress. So these are very important voters, and they tend to make their choices based on issues and on the candidate, not on party. These are the people who elected Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, George Bush, and Barack Obama, and Scott Brown, for that matter, in Washington. So, I mean, in Massachusetts. So I think Annabelle's question about, is it this bad? She mentioned that I wrote a book about the 1994 election and the Republican Revolution and the 104th Congress, which followed, the Gingrich Revolution. The book called The Freshmen, What Happened to the Republican Revolution. And I remember, I was working at NPR at the time, and I remember traveling out to Oklahoma and talking to voters the summer and fall before that 1994 election. And they were angry. They were very angry. They were talking about term limits. They throw the bums out. They didn't like the negative campaigns and commercials on either side. They were very fed up with the system, and that's what brought us, the Republicans, much more so than, if you remember, the contract with America and all of that. It was good PR, but the 1994 election was very much an anti-democratic vote, I believe, more than a pro-Republican vote. And it was, 2 years after Ross Perot ran for president and got almost 20% of the vote, if you can remember that. That was a time when people were very upset about the deficit, very upset about government spending, very upset about the economy. Again, a time of economic instability. And whenever we have economic instability, people are concerned and nervous and upset about their government. And I think they're worried about the bank bailout, and they're feeling that Main Street, you know, we're helping Wall Street, but we're not helping Main Street, and I think people are just very unsettled right now. And as Darrell mentioned, one of the factors that I think is fueling a lot of this discontent is this hyper-partisanship and polarization in Congress. Moderates are disappearing from Congress. You used to have, you know, a solid block of 30 or 40 moderate Republicans. They've dwindled down to less than a dozen. And moderate Democrats, you have a few more moderate Democrats, mostly from the South and the Midwest. They're the most endangered Democrats for re-election this time around. And so those moderates don't have a strong voice in Congress. And I personally think that, for example, the health care debate and the health care negotiations and consideration would have been very different if we had a very strong vocal bloc of moderates in Congress of both parties who could make their voices heard. I think we would have had more bipartisanship in Congress if that were the case. I'm just curious, when you think of Congress, because the Pew Research Center did a poll and asked people, when they think of Congress, what's the first word that comes to their mind? What is the first word that comes to your mind when you think of Congress?
Corporations.
Corporations?
Dysfunctional.
Dysfunctional. That was, bing, 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 bing. That was the #1 word that in a Pew Research survey of 20 words, the top 20 words, not one was positive of Congress. Words like dysfunctional was #1, corrupt, self-serving, inept, confused, incompetent, ineffective, lazy, bad, sucks, poor, crooks, disappointed, gridlock, idiots, slow, mess, lousy, and terrible.
And those are just the clean acronyms, right?
Those were the top 20 words. So if I was a member of Congress, I would be pretty concerned about my job security. And as Annabel mentioned to me 2 weeks ago, you know, if this was any other job, if that was your supervisors, and the people are the supervisors of Congress, let's face it, we're their employers. If that was your evaluation from your supervisor, you would really be in trouble. And so it's a serious situation. So, you know, that's pretty much it. I think those elected to Congress are tending to be at the extreme ends of the political spectrum. Republicans, because of realignment and redistricting, and we'll probably get into this a little bit, congressional districts tend to be very safe. Once you're elected to Congress, you know, the incumbency retention is very high. You've got some years like this one, or 94, 2006, when you have some turnover, but districts are designed to be safe for the incumbents, and to be safe for a Republican or safe for a Democrat. So you've got Republicans have become more conservative, Democrats have become more liberal, and there's not much in the middle. And it's a bad situation.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. One for Darrell and one for Linda. For Linda, I mean, Evan Bayh in his op-ed mentioned that he felt like the polarization in Congress is a reflection of polarization and kind of cultural divides in the country among people. So I wanted to know if you agreed with that, and I'm going to go ahead and ask you the question so that you have time to think about it. I want you to sort of help us understand kind of institutional reasons why we have people that are so partisan in Congress. Does it have to do with, say, the primaries? You know? So I just want you to think about that. So Linda, do you agree with that?
With Evan Bayh, that the country is polarized as well as Congress. I think there's something to that. I've spoken with Evan Bayh. He, as you all know, is leaving Congress. To a certain extent, I think he's a moderate. He's one of the more moderate Democrats in Congress. I think he has felt somewhat stymied. He's decided not to run for re-election. He's from Indiana. I know that he and Lindsey Graham, who is a Republican, have written a letter to the leadership of Congress and asked them, can't we have monthly meetings where we all get together and have lunch and talk about, you know, our issues, immigration or whatever it might be. Members of Congress do not get together as a body. They have, the Republicans meet in one room, the Democrats meet in one room, and they never get together. And so all they do is fight on the floor. They don't, the time was when they used to go out to dinner or socialize with each other. They don't do that anymore. And I think to some extent that does reflect the larger world. I think we probably tend to socialize with people who agree with us. And I think the media has become, I'm a journalist, I've been a journalist my whole life, and I am concerned about what's happening in the media. I'm very concerned. When I was putting things together last night for this, the phrase, remember the Navy recruiting phrase, it's not just a job, it's an adventure? That's the way people used to feel about journalism. You know, it was an adventure, it was an exciting pursuit. It was, you were doing the people's business. It's not an adventure anymore, it's kind of like a bad amusement park ride. You know, that the economic conditions are so rough for the media right now that I think there are a lot of factors that have made there's less reporting and a lot more opinion out there now. And I think there are a lot more websites that sort of espouse a lot of opinion, and I think people can read what they want to read that agrees with them, and I think a lot of times they're not getting different perspectives. And I also think the talking heads on television kind of reinforce this. It can be very shrill, it can be very sort of sensationalistic. You know, do we need another story about Britney Spears' underpants, or, you know, whatever the Sandra Bullock's cheating husband, or, you know, whatever the story du jour is. And I think there's not enough substantive stuff. You know, it's out there, obviously, the NewsHour on PBS, and there's a lot of good stuff out there, but there's also an awful lot of crap out there. And I think people have to really work to be well informed. You know, it's work to be a good citizen, you know, which is why you guys are here and why I really applaud you. It takes a lot of work to be an involved citizen of a democracy. And that's what we need, are more active citizens who are going to make their voices heard.